Hello, my name's Kerri. I'm one of the commissioning editors here at Simon & Schuster, and I'm very pleased to be welcoming Anne Watts to the table today to speak about her extraordinary memoir that we're publishing in June called Always the Children, a nurse's story of home and war. Tell us about growing up and when and where you grew up and what first inspired you to go into nursing.
Well, my mother was a nurse, and that's part of my DNA. I was born in Liverpool, and during the Blitz in 1940 we were evacuated out into the beauty of North Wales. My father was a merchant navy officer, away of course a lot of the time, so from being a very young child I grew up, and my brothers and sisters grew up with these rollicking tales from all over the world from my father, and he had a wonderful sense of humour. Thank God I inherited that from him.
You evoke the rural life beautifully. It just seems like an idyllic childhood, all the scrumping of the apples and these endless fields and forests to roam in.
And you played out,
not like today.
All day.
No traffic to worry about.
No.
But of course, very quickly on, once you realised that you did want to go into a profession that would help people, your dad wasn't all that enamoured with the thought of you being a nurse, was he?
Well, part of the tragedy of my mother, what happened surrounding my mother's death, probably coloured his feelings, perhaps, about nursing. I don't really know because, I've never analysed it. Life goes on, doesn't it? But the working title that I had for the book was No Daughter of Mine, because when I was just turned 16 and Daddy said, well, what are you going to do with your life? And I said, I'm going to be a nurse. He went ballistic, and he said, thumped the table and said, no daughter of mine is going to spend her life wiping other people's asses, is what he said.
Nonsense all the time.
No.
Yeah.
So
it wasn't a popular decision then?
It wasn't a popular decision at the time, no.
But you did, and you went on to qualify at Manchester Royal Infirmary.
Yes.
And very soon after that, you saw an ad.
Well, I did my midwifery,
yes.
And anyway progressed. And, we had relatives in Canada, and I did in fact go to Canada for a couple of years, which broadened my nursing experience, of course. And then when I came home in 1967, the summer of 1967, I thought, maybe now's the time to get married, settle down, perhaps do some courses at my training school. I was just sort of thrashing about a bit, although the marriage and children didn't feature too heavily. And I saw an advert in the Nursing Times for nurses needed for the expansion programme of a rehabilitation centre in a place called Quy Nhon in Vietnam.
So that must have been what they call a really big culture shock. You went from Manchester in the 60s to Vietnam, and there couldn't have been many British girls having the experiences you were.
Well, there were 3 or 4 of us at the centre, and 3 or 4 at a British team in Saigon, at the big children's hospital there, but we didn't see much of them because we were way up country. We were the only British nurses not in Saigon, or British anybody really. And it was what I call my growing up years, really, because there's nothing like nursing in a conflict, nursing children in a conflict, to bring the headlines to life.
And you worked closely with some of the American soldiers who helped out in the centre. The US Navy were helping to build just little desks and things for the children. There's some incredible stories, and a lot of these children really come to life as characters, even though they're very, very small, but they'd all suffered incredibly, hadn't they? Because to be in the centre in the first place meant that they must have lost their parents or
well, their limbs, their eyes, their, you know, I think what finally made me really try to put these stories down is my younger sister Joan said to me one day, you know, Anne, when you die, all these stories will die with you, and no one will ever know about Ba, who was a 10-year-old Vietnamese girl who had her legs blown off, Hui and the yellow ribbon story, all these wonderful stories on these children and these young soldiers whose hands you held, and all the funny human interaction between people, they'll all be lost. If that's what you want, then that's your prerogative. And that sort of, I thought, she's right. Because when you read about what goes on in the newspapers, that's only a one-dimensional list of, not even facts sometimes. But when you start talking about the people that all this is happening to and how they help each other, and the kindnesses and the heroism and the courage that exists in all of us. I mean, there is magnificence in all of us, as well as the dark side.
There are so many brilliant characters in this book, and especially the women. There's one person that really stands out for me, which is Dr. Pat Smith, who's this redoubtable American doctor, very tough, and what happened one day when she had a visit from the top brass of the US military, and I wonder if you could just mention that briefly.
We were examining sick children in the outpatient clinic, and I was helping her with this sick child, and these two senior officers came in, and one of them clicked his heels and saluted very smartly. And he was issuing an invitation to the White House by Richard Milhous Nixon, American president, US president of the United States, who wanted her to come to the White House on such and such a date to be given this Medal of Honor. And she just didn't even look at him, she just carried on examining the child. So I said, Pat, and the officer looked a bit nonplussed. I said, Pat, did you hear what he said? And she took a cigarette out of her mouth and she just slowly looked at him. And she said, now you tell that horse's ass from me that he can come here. He can leave the White House and come here if he wants to see me. Nobody's going to miss him. I was appalled, and this officer he looked completely nonplussed in that sort of, you know, military blank face kind of that they always have. And she said, you tell him that from me, fella. And she picked up her cigarette and just carried on.
All of the stories are in Anne's book, Always the Children, which is such an inspirational memoir for anyone who's interested in history, current affairs, and human beings.
And likes a good laugh.